Hello and welcome to this ISM Trust webinar on music and social prescribing for musicians working with community groups. I'm Ruth McPherson, Head of Charity Development at the ISM. To describe myself, I'm a white woman with mid-length brown hair and I'm wearing a white cardigan and a blue and white dress with a headset on and an ISM Trust logo behind me. And I'm really delighted to be joined on this webinar by Baz Chapman, General Manager of the Singing for Health Network, Emily Folks, Director of Music for Good and the Singing for Health Network, and Sue Moorchild, Social Prescriber for Wharfdale, Airedale and Craven Alliance. And before we begin the webinar, just a few things to note. During the presentations, please feel free to ask questions to our presenters by using the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer your questions at the end. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, let us know in the chat box and we'll attempt to resolve them. And if you wish to use them, subtitles are available to enable at the bottom of your screen. The webinar is being recorded and we will share the recording with you afterwards, as well as a feedback survey, which we'd be very grateful if you could fill out. It helps us to improve our professional development in future. So just a little bit of context about the ISM Trust. The ISM Trust is the ISM's sister charity, which offers high-quality professional development to everyone working in music. And through the ISM Trust, the ISM gives back to the music sector and supports and empowers music professionals to succeed. We produce award-winning events, training and resources, which are largely completely free to access for music professionals. If you're able to, please do consider supporting the work of the ISM Trust by becoming a friend, making a donation, or leaving a legacy. And any support you can offer us is always very much appreciated. Now, without any further ado, I'm very pleased to hand over to Baz, who is going to introduce you to his fellow presenters and give us an introduction to social prescribing. So thank you, and over to you, Baz.
Thank you, Ruth. Hello, everyone. I'm Baz. I'm tall, bald with glasses, middle-aged white man with a mid-green cardigan, I would say, and a piano keyboard behind me. Joining me is Emily Folks. Emily, do you want to describe yourself?
Hi there. Thank you, Baz. I'm a white, middle-aged woman with short to medium length blonde light brown hair. I'm wearing purple glasses and I have a yellow wall behind me.
And obviously we'll talk about Singing for Health Network, but just say a little bit about Music for Good and its work.
Yes, so I'm the Director of Music for Good, which was previously known as Kaimas Music, and we're based in Cornwall in the southwest and have been working in music and well-being and in music inclusion for more than 20 years.
Great, thank you. And folks, we have a real-life social prescriber with us. Sue, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Baz. Hi, I'm Sue Moorchild. I'm a social prescriber with Wharfdale, Airedale and Craven Alliance up north in West Yorkshire. I'm a slightly dumpy, very small, almost retired woman with light whitish hair, glasses, and I've got a very nice picture of some friends behind me and a mirror.
That's great. Thank you very much. Right, let's get stuck in. You probably don't need me to tell you that making music with other people can be beneficial for our well-being. But what if you're somebody who has a health condition or a need where music making might help, but either you don't know that or you might be too afraid to try it, or it might just be that you don't know what's in your area and you don't know what kind of a group you might be able to join. Cue the very exciting and huge opportunity that is social prescribing, part of the NHS long-term plan for personalised care and in place to varying degrees across the UK. The idea is that it gives people access to things which can improve their health and their well-being, but without the need for medicine, or complementary to the need for medicine. So there are a lot of people who go to GPs with things that actually the solution is not medication, or not just medication. It could be something that is to do with connecting socially, or having help with some of the things that are causing them problems in their life. So that might be something like a gardening group, or a cycling club, or a sewing bee, or it could be a choir or a music group. So in this session, we're just going to find out a bit more about what social prescribing is, how you can connect with it, and what it might mean for your group. It's worth saying at this point that next Friday on the 22nd, we're doing a webinar with Making Music, the National Federation of Music Societies, which is like the kind of next step after this, which will be going into more detail about the impact of social prescribing and how it's looking sort of nationally and internationally, and what next. That's a free webinar as well, so we'll include the link for that in the chat. Worth saying, I think, that social prescribing isn't a kite mark. There isn't a sort of national quality assurance framework. So if you're being social prescribing ready or social prescribing friendly, it's kind of like a kind of self-imposed thing. And that gives a lot of flexibility and freedom. But of course, it also then gives some concerns about making sure that the quality is there, and that if you are providing something, it's got the best chance of giving a good experience to that person who's been prescribed to you and to you as a group. So as we go through this introduction, let me recommend 3 things just to keep in mind. The first one is obvious, which is practical. What do you need to have in place? Who's going to do what? Are you going to have a buddy system? Who's going to find and liaise with a social prescriber? That sort of thing. Secondly, ethical. Why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you want to connect more with your community, because you want more members, because you want to access funding, or for the kind of the greater good, or because you want to really help with social prescribing and see it flourish? It's probably going to be a mix of those, but knowing that could be really useful. And then thirdly, how will you approach quality? How will you make sure that the skills and the attributes and the knowledge are there to make sure that the leadership of that group, both in terms of the pedagogy, but also in terms of how it runs itself and welcomes people, are going to be right to fit with social prescribing and with the various types of sort of condition that might be referred. So on that note, Emily, I wonder if you could outline some of the types of condition or need that often get referred certainly to kind of arts and culture groups.
Thank you, Baz. Well, I was going to just firstly just reflect on some statistics that were actually from 2018. So it's a few years ago and pre-COVID. But at that time, there was an estimation that in the UK, there were 26 million people living with a long-term health condition, and that predominantly that population was sort of over 65. So we are looking at sort of an older demographic. Long-term health conditions are typically sort of chronic pain, so fibromyalgia or arthritis, musculoskeletal pain, respiratory conditions, so typically things like COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and then also mental health, which can often be exacerbated if you've got a physical long-term health condition. Diabetes is also another one. So these are conditions that are not necessarily going to be cured with allopathic medicine, but need to be managed. And so actually, it's quite startling, even in 2018, that people with long-term health conditions were taking up 50% of GP appointments and 70% of a healthcare budget. So I think this is why we've seen, the publication of the 10-year NHS plan that's really looking at how we can support that significant part of the population that's living with long-term health conditions that could be supported to manage better through arts, and particularly through music and singing.
Great, yes, and I think certainly if you look at some of the introductory blurb that's on various sites, they often talk about the kind of the more the things that I suppose we all at some point in our lives might come across, which are things about just sort of general well-being, aspects of depression or isolation, where the solution may lie in just a facilitated connection, I guess, with what's available. Yeah. Also, you'll find that there are things like kind of, are you stressed about money, and things like that, and that's the kind of thing that interestingly people do seek advice for, the almost the sort of the symptoms of it. So it's that connectivity of things that can help someone who is feeling stressed about something in their life, so that they can look at both the kind of the impact it's having on them, but also try and fix the thing that is there. So things like financial advice are also viable, but our focus here is really on the sort of creativity and social aspects of what we're doing. So Sue, I'm going to come to you now, and we'll find out a bit more about the life of a social prescriber, because I think it's so valuable to understand, if you are connecting with a social prescriber, what goes on in their world, and how do you make that connect into an opportunity for music making and people to come to you. So Sue, just firstly, tell us a little bit about the system that you work in.
Okay, thank you, Baz. Yes, so my particular role is based within the NHS itself. I am work within GP practices, as do my colleagues across West Yorkshire, the Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven area. We will take referrals from health professionals, GPs, the care navigators in surgeries, the receptionists. People can also self-refer, and sometimes organisations outside of the GP practice will advise their clients to talk to their social prescriber. So that's how we get it connected up to the people that we support. So I will be sent a task, say from a GP, asking me to contact a patient. There'll be some indication of what they would like to talk about. And we have up to 6 appointments with a patient in order to have what we call the initial conversation and then ongoing support.
And how many social prescribers do you have in your area?
So our team, there are, now let me see, at the last count, there were 5 social prescribers, and we're part of a much larger team, which also includes children and family social prescribers, and also mental health coaches. Other areas may call the social prescriber a link worker, which is the same thing, but a different title.
Yeah, okay. And the ambition, I believe, is nationally for that number of people to grow. And I would imagine that you have a fairly busy caseload. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Although I have to say that during the summer months, July and August, our caseloads do decrease slightly when the sun comes out. And that's really a great thing, that people find that being out and about, doing all the things that we probably would advise them to do in any case, and enjoying the sunshine, do help their overall mental health well-being, as well as to some extent their health issues. But yes, it can get very busy, especially during the winter months, or at times where people have particular worries. You mentioned, Baz, for example, finances. As you can imagine, the cost of living has really increased the need for people to speak to social prescribers, particularly around things like food bank referrals, benefits advice, etc.
Okay. So how did you get into social prescribing, and what kinds of people are social prescribers?
Well, social prescribers, believe it or not, can come from all walks of life and disciplines. It's one of those roles where basically, first and foremost, you're bringing a bit of life experience with you. And also, I would say that there are people that work in other areas of the NHS come into social prescribing, perhaps when they retire from their current roles. People that work in the voluntary sector come into social prescribing. It really is a mixed bunch. I personally have worked in community-based settings for many years, and I'm also a trained social worker. Some people, particularly if they're mental health coaches, will have that mental health training background.
Right. But so a social prescriber is going to need to know a huge amount about sort of what's on in their area so that they can know what to prescribe to. How does that work? How do you find out?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, you've got to have a big head to keep all that information in, and I can tell you sometimes it's full to bursting. In our area, we start off by introducing ourselves to the local community and keeping up with what's happening by attending local network meetings, etc. So if there's a new group that's come into play that I've heard about, for example, I would initially make a connection with the group leader or the provider of that group or activity. I'd probably go along and say hello, not least to introduce myself to the people that are attending and tell them a bit about social prescribing. I might meet people or find out about activities via the patients that I speak to, in actual fact, who say, oh, I found X, Y, or Z, and I've, given it a go and I've really enjoyed it. And I'll say, oh, that sounds very interesting. Do tell me more. And that's a really lovely aspect of it, because it means that people who are seeking support are also being active in supporting others by helping with that. So, yeah.
What have been your observations and experiences about how music can be of benefit to the kinds of people that are being referred to you?
Yes, well, I would say that a lot of people who have, particularly over the last few years, who have maybe low mood, anxiety and stress, who've been signposted to some kind of musical activity, have found it to be beneficial in reducing that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we go on to success stories. I think for health reasons as well. So it's a wide range of reasons why people might access music type activities, and I will talk a little bit more about that a little bit further on.
Sure. So obviously music is a vast thing, and even certainly in the world of singing that we occupy in particular, there are so many different types of group that require different sort of types of ability, that have a different vibe about them. How do you navigate around the right kind of group for the right kind of person?
Well, I think you've really kind of hit the nail on the head, Baz, by saying the right kind of person. How we work and how I work very specifically is working with the person themselves from the very beginning. So in that initial conversation, I give the patient the opportunity to talk about what their concerns are, what their issues are, and then we move into what their interests are, things that they've enjoyed in the past that worked for them, things that they've been thinking that they might like to have a go at in the future. And they are the person at the end of the day who is an expert in what's going to work for them. So I would say most social prescribers, all social prescribers and link workers, will take their cue from the person that they're supporting. That's the essence, really. So going back to what do you need to be a social prescriber, the main thing is the ability to listen and to pick out those important aspects of that conversation and follow through with that. So I would make suggestions to people and perhaps send them a link to the information, give them the opportunity to explore those, and then follow up with another conversation where we would look at that in a bit more detail. And that's how You know, that's the best way. Putting the person central to what it is that they're going to be signposted to.
Right. So would you like to share a particular success story that you've had?
Yes. As we've talked about in the past, Baz, my whole interest in working with people to signpost them to and encourage them to take part in music and singing came from lockdown, and I delivered a series of online sessions with patients at one of the surgeries called the 5 Ways to Wellbeing. And as part of that, we had an online singing session, which went reasonably well considering it was early days of Zoom. And I know of at least 2 of those people that have gone on to participate in other singing or musical activities. One of the nicest stories I've been given was that someone went from having a little dabble with music in the past to thinking about going to join some kind of informal choir, not a choir that you know, has concerts, etc. And I signposted them accordingly. And in our next chat, I said, how did it go? Will you be going again? And they said, well, it was amazing. We went in, we sang a little song, which was easy to keep up with. I'd been sent the information beforehand of the songs that we were going to have a go at. And then the leader of the group introduced me and said this was my first time. And I was given a round of applause just for being there. And I just thought, well, that's fantastic. So I said, so will you continue to go? And that person said, absolutely. I felt so welcomed. And that was just lovely. And they've gone on to really enjoy singing as part of what they do to maintain their well-being. Our Wellbeing Cafe here in here in Wharfdale for people with dementia have, as part of their sessions, musical instruments and singing, including things like tambourines and little drums that resonate very much like Buddhist bells. And that group of people, many of whom are in the early stages or middle stages of dementia, have really responded very well to actually having that making music session. And really, that's the most enjoyable part of it. And the people that run that group have said how successful that is. Yes.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So we'll come back to you in a little while. Let's hear a bit more about your work, Emily. So this is looking more from the kind of the practitioner and the organization point of view, and what it's like to engage with the world of social prescribing when you've come from the sort of participatory arts background. So could you just tell us a little bit about the work that you've done with social prescribing over the years?
Yeah, so we actually started working with social prescribing when it was still quite an early concept. I mean, it's not an early concept, it's a thousands years old concept, but in terms of NHS priorities, in Cornwall we were involved with one of the very first pilot areas, so one of the very first GP surgeries to have a link worker. And do you know, I can't actually even remember how we initially made that contact, but it was just, we were lucky because at that time it was a new thing, and the surgery was just looking for for partners, for opportunities, things to signpost people to. So we've worked with mainly with just one area. So it's St Austell Healthcare, so they're responsible for about 3 or 4 GP surgeries. And we've worked across adults, so working with older people with long-term health conditions. And then more recently, in the last couple of years, we've been working with children and young people and families as well, because as Sue was just mentioning, children and young people's link workers are now starting to appear. So we now have gone from having just one social prescribing person in the surgery to having now at least 3. And there's one who is dedicated to work with children and young people. So we've kind of worked with both really, and we've worked in the GP setting itself, and we're continuing to do that now. And we've also worked outside of the setting, in a more sort of community environment. But just as Sue was describing, the link worker would get in touch and say, right, I've got somebody here who kind of fits, what it is that you're offering. But then what we would do is, and this does require a lot of resource, is that we would then have an initial conversation or a short taster session with that participant, just to meet, just to have that kind of connection, to really explain what it is that they're coming to. So they've got, because a singing or a choir experience, as Baz said, can vary so widely, that somebody's perceptions of what that might be could be very different from what it is that you're actually offering. So we found that we had the best engagement and the most success if the match was right. And so that was partly about having that initial conversation connection with the participant on a one-to-one basis, but also ensuring that the link worker is really, really clear about what the offer is as well. And we were lucky, as I said, we were quite early on. So we were able to work very closely with the first link worker. She's not there now, sadly, but we invited her to come to a taster session. I went into the surgery and I delivered a short presentation and taster session to various patient groups that they had running in the surgery. So she kind of really grasped what it was that we were doing, and I think it was the combination of our skill, our experience. We had all the kind of professional things in place that you would expect an organization to have, but we also had lots of the research at our fingertips and training. So we weren't just walking into this saying, we're a bunch of musicians and we'd like to work with some of your most poorly people. Actually, we've got everything in place, which was about the kind of the practical logistical things like the safeguarding policy, the procedures, all of that in place. 20 years track record, very highly skilled and experienced practitioners who have undergone additional training around working with health conditions. We're trauma informed, so that kind of awareness of mental health runs throughout our charity, and we also provide a lot of support for our practitioners. So we now have a clinical psychologist who works with us and offers a termly group peer reflection, peer supervision session for our practitioners, and then they're a peer network within themselves, so they seek support from each other and from us. So it's a very, very supportive environment, and I'm aware that we're a charity, and many groups are not necessarily attached to that kind of infrastructure and maybe working alone. So this is one of the things that the Singing for Health Network we've been quite keen to look at, not just training and support, training for practitioners, but that support. And so we did pilot an online peer reflection group that met monthly for 6 months with a clinical psychologist, and it was just such an incredibly valuable and rich experience for everybody involved, because we're holding so much, as practitioners. So it's having those support mechanisms in place. But I would just say, just to be really, to tread kind of cautiously with this, and not kind of think I want to help everybody and I'm going to open up my doors and say yes, I can refer anybody and everybody to me, because you need to be really realistic about what you can manage. If it's an existing group, how's that going to work within an existing group? The very practical things about is the building accessible? If somebody's being referred and they're in a wheelchair but they can't access the building, then that's a no-go. But I think one of the other things is around how much information a link worker is able to share with an organization or with a practitioner. So obviously there are issues there around GDPR and sharing of we can't see their whole medical records. one of the projects that we're involved in, we are working very, very closely with the social prescribing team, and we're working in the surgery. And in fact, they're now funding the work to continue. And although we contract our practitioners, they also contract our practitioners on an honorary NHS contract, which means that they go through a certain amount of induction and training, and that they can then have access to a bit more information than you would do normally. But I imagine, like for Sue, for link workers, it's quite difficult being in that position where you've just got to share enough with that group, with that choir or whatever, that they get a flavour of the person coming. But I can imagine that it might be quite difficult sometimes. I mean, for example, we had this just lovely man that used to come, and he was very, very poorly, really, really, really unwell. He just sort of disappeared and stopped coming. And I contacted the link worker and found out that he'd passed away. And, so it was just how we wouldn't know these things. So yeah, that was a tricky, unfortunate situation, but you can't expect the link worker to just pick up the phone and tell us. I feel like I've rambled off away from your question, Baz, but
it's wonderful. No, thank you. And I think it highlights the fact that a lot of us who run music groups are probably going to have some of the people with some of the kinds of conditions that social prescribing will refer anyway, particularly around mental health conditions. But what you've highlighted there, I think, Emily, is that within that is the need to kind of understand what that might look like if someone's actually being referred, and how that might manifest itself, and how much do they want attention drawn to themselves? Do they want even people to know that they've been socially prescribed? But then there's also other sort of more sort of clinical conditions that might be something like lung health, where actually a practitioner might think, I need to know more about this before I even know if I can work with that person. So it's a really interesting area, and as you say, sort of one of the reasons we set up the Singing for Health network to try and make that connection. I want to ask both of you actually about, there can be a perception that, like, the health system is something that sits over there and there's a great big gulf in between, and how on earth do you get through the door and make those sorts of relationships? So any sort of top tips for a nice kind of way to approach making those connections? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first, shall I?
Go on, Sue.
Well, I think the example that Emily gave there about having small group sessions within the surgery so that people can get a flavour for what you're doing. Not related directly to music, but an outward bound organisation up here put on a taster session for social prescribers and the mental health coaches to actually participate in. This was where people could go along to an activity where you were outside in a park with a little bit of woodland nearby, and do some mindfulness activities, do some drawing and sketching and craft work, and they probably did a little bit of singing as well, I would imagine. And the social prescribers had a very jolly afternoon all together. Social prescribers from lots of different surgeries and organisations in and around the area, and we actually had a taster session, and that was a great way of making that connection, which I personally really enjoyed, and I know my colleagues did as well.
Emily, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Sue's already kind of alluded to this, but I think in terms of trying to track down and navigate this whole world of social prescribing, it's important to say that a link worker may have a different name. They may not be a link worker. They might be a social prescriber. They might be a community connector. They might be a wellbeing person. There are a few different names for that role, and sometimes they are funded and sit within a health setting, and sometimes they're not. They sit within a voluntary sector organisation. So there's not a consistent way of kind of finding who you need to find. But I would say that each area has, so we've got Volunteer Cornwall, so that's our voluntary sector umbrella organisation, and they work very, very closely with Social Prescribing. So that's our kind of where we go to. We also do have a social prescribing network in Cornwall, and so the person that coordinates that is supported via Volunteer Cornwall. So we go straight in there, and we've been invited to network meetings to go and present and run taster sessions where, like Sue was just saying, you've got a good amount of social prescribers, link workers all in the same room together. So you kind of get that, you know, extra hits because you get them all in one go. So yeah, the voluntary sector kind of umbrella organisation is a great place to start, or just look on your primary care network websites or your GP surgeries if you're working in a very local area. Just do a bit of digging around and searching around, because it should now be established enough that you should be able to find something if you search for social prescribing in your area. Yeah, Sue.
Yes, I was going to say as well that sometimes it may be that groups are actually approached by a social prescriber or link worker with a new idea. Because part of what we do is that we are able to identify the gaps where activities and groups or services are needed, but perhaps we haven't got something in our local community. We may have heard about it in another community and felt like, well, yes, I know quite a few people on my list who would benefit from something like that. So sometimes it works the other way, where the social prescriber comes a knocking and says, oh, I've got this idea, you know, I have a plan. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's you've sort of highlighted there the fact that it's different in different areas. In some areas I've heard from people who, you know, they struggle to sort of get the time and the attention of their link workers, and then in other areas the link workers are absolutely crying out and scouting everywhere they can find. And some of that is just a case of getting stuck in and seeing what's there and seeing how to navigate it. And you know that if we're giving a message that it feels like it's really horribly difficult to do, that's probably not our intention. But I think the thing with this is we've been banging on for decades about the importance of arts on prescription, you know, this idea that surely there must be more to healthcare than prescribing drugs. And we've got this brilliant opportunity to do this, and we want to get it right, and we want to make sure that the right people are being prescribed to the right kind of activity. To make that work, we need to try and make all parts of the system understand what's going to work most effectively. So before we move to questions, I just want to take a moment to introduce you to something where, if you're interested in this and you do nothing else, then have a look at this thing that we've produced, because this is a free thing. This is a page on the Sing for Health website where we've just put together some straightforward guides on how you get started with all of this, what social prescribing looks like. There's things like some sort of example timelines and who to kind of put in place. There's even some kind of questionnaire templates that you can ask yourself to make sure that you might be social prescribing ready. But also, and I think crucially, we've done one for social prescribers and link workers as well, with the idea that they may be accessing these directly, or you, if you are approaching a social prescriber, can go, look, we've got this guide. Because in that are things, and Sue's been really helpful with this, things like, actually, how can you have a conversation with someone who might be interested and get them to the point of going, yes, I want to try that group. And if you don't have skills and experience in that area as a social prescriber, that's really hard to do without support. So do make use of these. And then also on this page, we've got Brilliantly Making Music have created an equivalent for instrumental groups. Our main focus is singing, but obviously instrumental groups have got massive potential to connect with this as well. So you can get that from Making Music, and it's great. There are links here to other UK nations. I will say that England is probably the most developed in the world for this, in terms of the infrastructure that we have. Some of the other UK nations, it's a little bit hard to track down what there is. Often you can find out a project in your area, but looking at kind of national frameworks is a bit more difficult. So we've put in some links there to at least kind of get you started, but there might be a little bit more kind of squirreling work to go on if you want to make connections outside of England. There is a social prescribing network in Scotland, as well as a social prescribing network in England. A couple of other things just to point out that are also available on this screen. You can link through to the National Academy for Social Prescribing. Their website is, since they first set themselves up, is much more developed now, and they've got all kinds of tools. They've got things like evidence, particularly around arts and creative activities, that can help you to make the case. They've got all kinds of case studies and stuff that just makes you feel, actually, this is a real thing. You know, this is really going places, and it's really genuinely changing people's lives. And then finally, the prescribearts.org is a listing site specifically around arts and creative activities that can link with health, and that's supported by the National Academy. So if you want to list things that are available, you can do that through them, but equally you can signpost people if they're looking for particular groups. Before I hand back to Ruth for Q&A stuff, just also to say the Singing for Health Network is here to help and to develop this movement that now is Singing in Health, and it's growing, and the need and the demand is also growing. So if you feel like this is something that is for you and that you want to develop more and maybe do some training and get more skills and knowledge, then do consider joining the network. It's only 25 quid a year, and we're a very friendly and hopefully very helpful bunch. So we're going to leave it at that in terms of our initial presentations, but very keen to see if we can help answer some questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Baz, Emily and Sue, for your contributions. It's been a really interesting discussion so far, and you'll be pleased to hear we have lots of questions, so let's get stuck in. Maybe let's start with some of the questions about making connections. So someone has asked, how can I let it be known that I'd like my singing group to be linked up to and of service to the NHS? Any recommendations? Sue?
Yes, well, I think first of all, find your social prescriber. I think that's the key message, isn't it? And then have a discussion with them, or if your local surgery or doesn't have a social prescriber per se, or you can't find a voluntary organisation role, then just have a chat with your GP and say, you know, we've got this group and we'd like to be able to support people in the local community, and would like to know from you what would help. So it's about really just making those connections. Maybe Emily, you've got some ideas as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say that you'll probably find mixed responses if you want to leave flyers or posters in GP surgeries or community settings or pharmacies. Some might be more open to that than others, but certainly I've experienced surgeries that wouldn't put something up if there was a cost for participants to come along, so they might have certain rules around that, but it's worth an ask. It's worth having some kind of flyer or poster and seeing if anybody would be willing to have that in their venue, in their setting. And also make connections with other choirs and with other music groups in the area, because they may already be connected in. And that's something that maybe through the Singing for Health Network you could use our forum to connect with other members and find out, you know, you might realise that there's somebody just, you know, 2 miles down the road who's already doing it. Chances are you probably know that already, but what we're really hoping to do through the network is to help people to kind of connect with each other and get a sense of what's going on.
Yeah, that sounds really valuable, to learn from others who are already doing it. Just kind of linked to that, somebody asked, what are the new groups that musicians should introduce themselves to that Sue was talking about? Was that connected to groups that are already involved in social prescribing? Sue, can you help with that one?
can you just repeat the question again, please? I didn't
Yeah.
quite...
So it's just, what are the new groups that musicians should introduce themselves to that you were talking about earlier?
The new groups. Oh, okay. Well, I think what I meant by that was that that if there is a group that is starting in this way in the community, or the social prescriber has an idea that they want to take to an existing group to look at building a bigger kind of catalogue, if you like, of activities to offer. I think that's perhaps the meaning. That's what I was meaning with that. And I agree with Emily, if you are a new group, say a group of musicians who are thinking, well, you know, wouldn't it be great if we could offer this as a support to people that might benefit from it, then a good place to start is with an existing, maybe local voluntary organisation, or as Emily says, take your flyers in to your GP surgery. But of course, we are limited when it is in our role, we are limited if it's a pay for event or session. So it's always good to look at funding opportunities as well, so that you can offer it on maybe a donation only or pay as you feel aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that leads on. We had a few questions about funding. So someone asked, how do you get funding to start up a choir specifically with social prescribing in mind? Have you got any ideas on that?
Yeah, opening a can of worms. How long have we got? I think funds for this kind of work is, you know, becoming much more competitive. However, big funding bodies like the Arts Council are now really, you know, understanding that creative health is a thing, and that it needs to be something that is funded from these national bodies. But I mean, we've had experience of where the social prescriber and the GPs have actually helped us and supported us to seek out little pots of funding here and there. It's worth tapping into local councillors, because they might have pots of funding. We've had, you know, our local councillors given us money, Rotary clubs, you know, little local kind of groups. Or as Sue was just saying, if you connect yourself with maybe a charity, you know, like Mind, or I don't know, Parkinson's UK, or, you know, with charities that you could then work with them, and they could support and maybe apply for funding on your behalf. And the other thing is to kind of form collectives with others. So obviously we were lucky because we got into this kind of quite early on, but I would imagine now that for link workers it's probably quite overwhelming. They probably get approached a lot by individuals, by organizations, and it must be quite a lot of noise going on. So I would recommend trying to hook up with other like-minded practitioners or groups that you could make a collective approach and say, look, between us we can cover choirs or music groups for these ages, in this, put together a proposal that really shows how what you do can help to meet the targets. And the targets are going to be around health inequalities and about supporting people with long-term health conditions. Those are going to be the kind of main things that they're going to be looking for. So look at the NHS 10-year plan, look at how you can align what you can do so that you can go straight to them and say, we're a collective of music organisations and this is what we can offer. Here it is. You don't have to do any sort of thinking or trying to piece it together yourself. Make it as easy as possible.
Okay, thank you. That sounds really helpful.
Just
Baz has popped a link in the chat.
Oh yes, I have. Yeah. I would just pick up on the thing that Emily said earlier as well, that going in sort of armed and sort of knowing how your two kind of objectives might meet. Certainly, if you go anywhere near a kind of clinical commissioning group in the NHS, you won't sort of get through the door unless you really understand a sense of what the outcomes are. And Emily, you mentioned earlier about before we started this, around kind of one of the impacts of one of the things you did that had reduced the number of ongoing referrals. Do you want to just mention that? Because I thought that's a really useful example of a thing that you could potentially be able to wield.
Yeah, and again, this is something that we've got aspirations within the Singing for Health Network to gather more of this evidence. But certainly in terms of impact, we've had older people who are reducing their use of medication, reducing use of inhalers, which we don't advise. We say if you're changing any medication or reducing medication, you need to do that under the guidance of a doctor. But we are seeing that, and with our children and young people's program, we're seeing that young people that are on a waiting list for CAMHS, the suggestion and the noises that we're getting from the GP surgery is that actually once they've had that intervention with us, that there's less likelihood that they're going to need to go on to secondary care, and they've seen that as so valuable that they've now sourced funding to keep us in the surgery providing music.
Yeah, and I think just leading on from that, somebody's asked, how are groups that patients attend monitored in terms of their success or suitability to deal with social prescribing? Could you give us some info on that, Emily?
Well, I think it's a bit patchy on this, and Sue, might jump in here as well, because some patients might continue to have contact with their link worker, and they would probably provide the updates and tell the link worker how brilliant it is, or what kind of impacts they're having. We try to do that as well and try to report back, and we've put together sort of little impact reports and things like that, or celebration events where we invite link workers and GPs to come along. But this is all very, it's very resource heavy to be able to do that. Sue, have you got anything to add?
Yes, I would agree. It's not something that I would do on a regular basis in terms of actually connecting with the group itself. But the more feedback I get from a patient or a person that I'm supporting in those follow-up conversations, the more of a picture I will get as to whether that's something that really is worthwhile to sign people to. And on occasion, within time limitations, I do personally try to pop in, but that, as you say, that may not be the case for everybody. I think the outcomes that we record in terms of how people feel when they're expressing, whether they're continuing to express low mood, for example, or will give us a little bit of a picture as well. We have a survey that we send out which asks specifically, did the things that you were signposted to help you? And people are asked to give us the feedback in that respect. So it's a kind of, as you go along, building up of the wider picture, mainly. Yeah.
So rather than formal kind of evaluation, it's more sort of based on testimonials and feedback. Okay. We've had quite a few questions about training. Sorry, Emily, do you want to add something?
Sorry. Yeah, I think it just depends on where the funding's from as well, because there might be requirements to report back to funders and things like that. So I think it will vary hugely in terms of what you gather in terms of monitoring and evaluation and impact. But I would say it's good practice to try and do that anyway, even if you're not having to do it for funders. And I just had another thought about funding, actually, that there's funding certainly coming through our Cornwall Community Foundation. So again, you'll have a local equivalent of that. That's a funding body that distributes. And at the moment we're just applying now for a pot of £10,000 that's come from the Integrated Care Board. So it's money for community provision to support health and wellbeing, health and inequalities. So that's something you might want to just take a look at right now, because we're just in the throes of an application now.
Yes, and I do agree that evaluating as you go along with your group really helps. Our Singing for Lung Health spring evaluation showed, for example, that the anxiety levels of people dropped quite drastically on the in the way in which they're measured, and that people reported that they felt very well supported and had a lot of fun. And really, if someone is coming away with a smile on their face, and they're excited to return week by week or what have you, that's the proof of the pudding, as it were.
And they become the real advocates for it in a way. It's like you can stop having to, try and make the case so strongly once you've got people in the fold that can then do that advocacy and can speak and can tell them, can stand up or can go on the radio and talk about, actually, I couldn't walk down to the end of my road and now I've walked up Glastonbury Tor and I never thought I could do that. People sharing those personal stories is that I've seen what an impact that can have on the people that we need to have that impact on. So yeah, don't underestimate the power of those stories. And they want to do it as well. They want they want the provision to continue. So they want to do, whatever they can to help share.
Great, thank you. We've had a few questions about training, so if we could just run through some of those. Someone asked what training and qualifications are available in order to become a music social prescriber. Any tips?
We knew about this question in advance, and we're not aware that there is such a thing as a music social prescriber. It's more about generic social prescribing and then music. We love the idea, but I think it's more about kind of if you're interested in becoming a social prescriber, perhaps Sue, you can mention something about that. But then maybe we then need to talk about kind of the maybe some of the training you might need in place if you want to be a sort of a practitioner or a group leader that connects with it. But Sue, how do you become a social prescriber?
Well, as I said earlier, a lot of it is to do with what background experience you have and keeping your eyes open for the job in the area that you work. We do have ongoing training around things like listening skills, managing patients who may be very stressed, very anxious, supporting peer support, development, etc. So the job itself does have its own ongoing training aspect to it. And I would say that's the same up and down the country. In terms of whether you feel that you have the skills for it, I think if you see a social prescribing job or a link worker job, whatever they're called, that you're interested in, have a look at the job spec and all that bit that says this is what we're looking for, and look at yourself and say, can I do that? Am I good at that? You probably are if you've got an interest in people and you want to do this kind of work.
Great, thank you. And then on the flip side, there are also questions about training available for people who lead choirs and groups to help them support people under social prescribing, and also specific training for those working with people with health conditions. Any ideas on that?
Yeah, well, Baz, feel free to jump in here as well. But what there isn't is a kind of generic training or qualification in being a social, being a group or a facilitator that can work within health. There isn't that. What there is in singing is specialist training. So there's singing, Sing to Beat Parkinson's, deliver training on working with people with Parkinson's with singing. And there's Feeney Cave, the musical breath, who runs courses if you want to specialize in singing for lung health. Those are the two main ones really that we've got in this country of very targeted specific training that's been developed over several years. But again, this is something that we're really keen on looking to see whether the Singing for Health Network can support a kind of CPD training program that suits where people want to be. So it could be that actually you just need to know a little bit because you're running a group that's community focused. You're not looking to specialize or work with a specific health condition. You just want to kind of broaden your understanding. If you've got somebody that comes in with a respiratory condition, just what are sort of some slight things that you might need to consider without becoming a Singing for Lung Health practitioner. There are some things that you could just adapt within your practice. So that's probably a sort of more generalist training that we could potentially see ourselves filling a gap there. But then there is the more sort of targeted, like if you want to run a Singing for Lung Health group specifically, then I would recommend looking at that specialist training, because then you could be working with people who are really very, 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 very poorly, and we have to be very careful, very, very careful. with that. Baz, do you want to add anything?
No, just to reiterate that the need for something like that kind of training is probably quite strong, and something that we are very keen to do.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid we're out of time. We had a few more questions, but if anybody would like to send their questions through to us at inquiries@ismtrust.org, then I would be very happy to forward them on to our presenters if you would like some further information. And we'll also be sending out the recording of the webinar to everyone who registered, along with some useful links. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much to Baz, Emily and Sue for that fascinating insight into social prescribing, and thank you to everyone for joining us. I hope you found the session informative and useful. Please do fill out our post-webinar survey. You'll find it in the chat, and we'll also put it in the email to you with the recording. We really appreciate your feedback. It helps us to improve our services and to offer more free professional development to musicians. And as I said, that recording will be sent to you, and it will also be on our website to watch back. And we have another webinar coming up next week about Ofsted. That's Ofsted Music in Schools on Thursday, the 21st of September at 4 p.m. So do come along to that if you're interested. And finally, just thank you very much again for watching, and we hope to see you at another ISM Trust event soon. Goodbye.